You're carrying about 5,000 faces. Rob Jenkins, Andrew Dowsett, and Mike Burton worked that number out in 2018. They asked people to list every face they could recall from their own life and from the media, then watch the rate at which the names dried up. Then they tested recognition against thousands of photographs, 5,000 on average. The range across everybody they tested ran from 1,000 to 10,000. And that is a modeled estimate resting on several assumptions, so hold the number loosely and the scale of it firmly, because the scale is the point. We evolved in groups of under 100, and we are walking around with a filing system built for a small town. Now try to retrieve the name of someone you saw yesterday. 7 facts about how that system handles people. Number 6 is the one that should change how much you trust any memory of anyone. 1. The face is easy, the name is the hardest thing in it. Try a small experiment. Picture a man you were told is a baker. Then picture a man you were told is called Baker. Same sound, same syllables, same effort to hear. And in Work by McWeeny, Young, Hay, and Ellis in 1987, people were reliably better at retrieving the occupation than the surname. Researchers still call it the Baker-Baker paradox. The reason is that occupation attaches to everything you already know. A baker has flour and early mornings and a shop, so the word arrives with handles on it. The surname Baker attaches to nothing. It is an arbitrary label bolted to a person with no supporting structure underneath. So when you look at someone across a room, know exactly who they are, remember where you met and what they do for a living, and cannot produce the one word you need. Nothing has gone wrong with you. You're running into the design too. The people who stay are mostly from one decade. Ask someone in their 60s to list vivid memories from their whole life, and the answers do not spread evenly, they cluster. David Rubin and colleagues documented this in the 80s, and it has been found repeatedly since. Memories from roughly age 15 to 30 come back at a far higher rate than memories from the decades either side. Researchers call it the reminiscence bump. The explanations are still argued over novelty, because everything is happening for the first time. Identity, because that is the window when you're deciding who you are. And a cultural life script, because the events we are told to expect, first love, leaving home, first job, are all scheduled in that stretch. Whatever the mechanism, look at the consequence. The people you met in that decade are stored more deeply than people you have known far longer. Someone you spent 2 years with at 19 can be more vivid than a colleague of the last 8 years, and that is not a statement about who mattered more. 3. You remember a person by 2 moments, not by an average. Donald Redelmeyer and Daniel Kahneman studied over 150 patients undergoing an uncomfortable medical procedure. Patients reported their discomfort in real time, then rated the whole experience afterwards. The overall rating was not predicted by the total amount of discomfort or by how long it lasted. It was predicted by the worst moment and the final moment. In one condition, they deliberately extended the procedure with a mild, less painful ending, which added more total discomfort, and patients rated that version as better. That is the peak end rule, and I want to be careful. It was established for experiences of pain over minutes and hours, not for relationships over years. Extending it to how you remember a person is my framing rather than a tested result. But look at how you actually talk about people. You do not produce an average. You produce a highlight and a final scene, which means the last month of a friendship can outweigh the 9 good years underneath it, and that is a measurement error rather than a verdict. 4. The bad parts fade faster than the good parts. This one has a name and a large evidence base. The fading affect bias, studied extensively by Richard Walker and John Skowronski. When people record events and rate the emotion attached to them, then rate the same events again, months or years later, the unpleasant feeling has faded more than the pleasant feeling. Positive affect holds on. It sometimes even grows. This is why the person who made you miserable improves in memory. The specific irritations degrade first. The warm evenings survive, and eventually the version you carry is not the person you lived with. One thing worth knowing, because it matters more than the fact itself. The effect is reduced and can be reversed in people experiencing depression, anxiety, or disordered eating. If your memory is doing the opposite, keeping the pain sharp while the good parts wash out, that is not a character flaw. It is a documented pattern that comes along with those conditions, and it is worth taking to someone qualified. 5. A smell will do in a second what an hour of trying cannot. Ask someone to deliberately recall a person, and they produce a summary. A few facts, a general impression, a story they have told before, then a specific soap or a cigarette in cold air, or a particular washing powder arrives without warning, and something entirely different happens. The memory that comes back is unrehearsed and detailed and lands with an emotional force the summary never had. The olfactory system has an unusual anatomy. Smell has direct connections into the amygdala and hippocampus without the relay that other senses pass through. Researchers have consistently found odor-evoked memories to be older, less rehearsed, and more emotionally intense than memories cued by words or pictures. Which means the version of somebody you can summon on purpose, and the version that ambushes you're not the same file. Deliberate recall gives you the story. A cue gives you the person. 6. Every time you remember someone, you edit them. Here's the one I promised. Memory does not work like reading a file. It works more like reopening a document, and reopening carries a risk of change. In 2000, Karim Nader, Glenn Schaaf, and Joseph Ledoux showed in rats that a reactivated memory becomes briefly unstable and appears to need rebuilding to persist. Blocking protein synthesis during that window damaged an established memory that had been perfectly intact beforehand. The concept is called reconsolidation. The honest position on humans is messier. Behavioral studies in people have produced inconsistent results, and researchers continue to argue about the boundary conditions. What is not in dispute is the older finding underneath it, going back to Frederick Bartlett, that human remembering is reconstruction rather than playback, and that each retelling can shift what gets stored. Follow that through, and it is uncomfortable. The person you have thought about 10,000 times is the person you have edited 10,000 times. The one you have barely revisited may be closer to the original. Your strongest memories of someone are, by that logic, the least reliable ones you have. 7. Unfinished things do not stay sharper. They just pull. You have heard this one. Interrupted tasks are remembered better than completed ones. An idea from Bluma Zygarnik in 1927, and it gets applied to relationships constantly. The conversation you never had is supposedly why you cannot let go. In 2025, Romain Ghibellini and Beat Meyer published a meta-analysis of the accumulated research on this. They found no memory advantage for unfinished tasks at all. The recall claim, the famous one, does not hold up. What they did find held up was the other half, named after Maria Ovsiankina. There is a real and general tendency to resume what was interrupted. So the popular version is wrong in an interesting way. An unfinished relationship is not lodged more deeply in your memory. It is generating a pull to go back and close it, which is a completely different mechanism with completely different implications. You're not haunted. You have an open loop, and loops can be closed without the other person's participation. Put the 7 together and something awkward emerges. You carry thousands of people. You cannot retrieve their names. The ones stored most deeply arrived in a single decade of your life. You judge them by a peak and an ending rather than by the whole. The unpleasant parts decay faster than the pleasant parts. A smell reaches them more directly than any deliberate effort, and every act of remembering revises what you're remembering, which means the person you're missing tonight is not a recording. It is a reconstruction, assembled from a biased sample, softened by time, weighted toward 2 moments, and rewritten a little more every time you visit it. That is not a reason to stop. Reconstruction is not the same as invention, and the people we carry are genuinely built from something real. But it is worth knowing that when you're comparing someone present against someone remembered, the remembered one is playing with an advantage that has nothing to do with who they were. That is the cue most people miss. Who did this bring back for you? Leave it in the comments if you want to. Subscribe to Psychology Q, and I will keep showing you the signals hiding in plain sight.